Far away, in a quiet corner of the galaxy, there was a small alien colony. The colony was peaceful, made up of families, workers, and farmers who had never known real war. Their days were simple, their nights calm. But peace does not last forever. Without warning, a fleet of raiders appeared in the sky. The attackers came like shadows, ships painted black, weapons glowing with red fire. They had no mercy, no need for reason. They came to take, to burn, and to kill. The aliens were not soldiers. Their ships were slow, their weapons weak. They could not stand against the storm. Within hours, their defenses were broken. Homes were destroyed, towers collapsed, and the sky burned with falling fire. Panic spread across the colony. Mothers clutched their children, elders prayed to gods that no longer answered, and leaders stood helpless. There was no escape. In the central hall, the alien council gathered. Their faces were pale, their voices trembling. "We cannot fight them," said one elder, his hands shaking. "If we resist, they will kill us all." Another cried out, "Then what choice do we have? Do we wait for death?" Silence followed. No one had an answer. They were too far from their allies. Too weak to defend themselves. Too small to be noticed. Or so they thought. One of the younger leaders, a woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "There is one thing left," she said. "The signal beacon." The room turned to her. The beacon. An old device, buried deep in the ground, built long ago for a time of last hope. It was not meant for their own people. It was meant for anyone, anywhere, who might hear their cry. But using it was dangerous. No one knew who would answer. It could be a friend. It could be something far worse. Still, hope was all they had left. With heavy steps, they walked to the chamber below. Dust covered the old beacon, its lights dim, as if waiting for this moment. The young leader placed her hands on the controls. "If there is anyone out there," she whispered, "please hear us." Then she pressed the switch. The beacon roared to life. A wave of energy spread through the stars, faster than light, carrying one message: "We are dying. Help us." The signal shot across the void, cutting through empty space, passing suns and frozen worlds. It traveled where no ship had gone, searching, reaching. And then, somewhere far away, it was heard. Back on the colony, the aliens waited. They knew it could take hours, days, or years. They knew no one might come. Outside, the enemy pressed harder. Cities burned. Families were dragged into the streets. The raiders laughed, knowing victory was close. The alien people huddled together, whispering that the beacon had been sent, but deep inside, none of them truly believed. That night, the sky was dark with smoke, lit only by fire. The young leader stood on the balcony of the hall, watching her world crumble. She closed her eyes. "We have called for help," she said softly. "But what if help never comes?" She did not know that far away, beyond the maps of the galaxy, beyond the reach of most stars, her signal had touched the ears of a people with a name whispered in both fear and respect. They were not gentle. They were not weak. They were survivors of a place so deadly that even the strongest creatures of the galaxy could not live there. They were known as Deathworlders. And when they heard the cry for help, they did not look away. They did not turn aside. They listened. And they answered. The aliens, still trapped in despair, could not yet imagine what kind of force they had called. They could not know that the signal they sent in fear would bring not only hope, but also fire, war, and a power unlike any they had ever seen. For the Deathworlders had heard their distress, and once humans hear a cry for help, the galaxy itself learns what it means when humanity moves. The colony still burned. The enemy still hunted. But far beyond, engines roared, ships turned, and a fleet began its journey. The story of what would come next was already written in the stars. The aliens had called. And the Deathworlders were coming. The signal crossed light years in moments, its cry for help echoing across the emptiness of space. It reached a place where few dared to go, a sector of the galaxy known for its storms and violent stars. There, hidden in the black void, a fleet of ships drifted in formation. They were not sleek or elegant like other alien designs. They were heavy, scarred, and built for war. These were human ships. Deathworlders. On the flagship, the bridge hummed with life. Screens glowed, officers moved with practiced speed, and the air smelled faintly of metal and oil. At the center stood Admiral Joran Hale, a man forged by years of battle. His uniform was worn, his eyes sharp, and his voice carried the weight of command. When the beacon signal reached the ship, alarms sounded. A young officer looked up from his console, shock in his voice. "Admiral, we've received a distress call." The room fell silent. Hale stepped forward. "Origin." The officer hesitated. "A colony in the outer rim. Alien species unknown. They are under attack. Their defenses are failing." The message played across the room, a broken, desperate voice crying for help. Static filled the gaps, but the meaning was clear. A people were dying. They had called, not knowing who might hear. The admiral's jaw tightened. "Set a course. Ready the fleet." His words cut through the silence like a blade. No one questioned him. This was the way of Deathworlders. When the weak called for help, they answered, not with words, but with fire and steel. The crew moved quickly, entering coordinates, charging the drives, preparing weapons. Engines roared to life, and the great ships turned toward the stars. Among the crew, whispers spread. They had all heard stories about answering distress calls. Some remembered battles where entire civilizations had been saved. Others remembered battles where no survivors remained, except the humans themselves. The galaxy called them saviors or monsters, depending on the day. But one thing was always true: once humans came, nothing stayed the same. In the admiral's quarters, he stood before a screen showing the message again. The alien leader's face was filled with terror, begging anyone to come. Hale's eyes softened for a moment. "They never expect us," he said quietly to himself. "But they always call in the end." He knew the truth. Humanity was born on a death world, a planet where everything tried to kill them. They had grown strong, cruel when needed, but always survivors. And survival had taught them one lesson above all others: when someone weaker asks for help, you do not ignore them. The fleet gathered in formation, dozens of massive warships, their hulls scarred from old battles. They were not beautiful, but they were terrifying. Each ship carried weapons capable of splitting moons, soldiers who had fought in the harshest of wars, and commanders who knew no fear. The engines flared bright, and the void trembled as they prepared to jump. "Admiral," another officer spoke, her voice calm but curious. "What if the attackers are stronger than we expect?" Hale turned, his expression cold but steady. "Then we will remind them what Deathworlders are. We don't measure strength the same way others do. We fight until the last breath. That is why they fear us. That is why they cannot stop us." The officer nodded, understanding. The order was given. "Jump." The fleet vanished into the dark, crossing the stars faster than light, hunting the source of the call. Far away, in the alien colony, the people still waited in despair. They did not know that help was already on the way. They did not know that the Deathworlders had heard their cry and were now racing across the galaxy to reach them. The raiders outside laughed and celebrated their coming victory, but their laughter would not last. On the flagship, Admiral Hale stood tall as the stars stretched around him. He thought of the aliens who had called. They did not know what kind of warriors were coming. They did not know that they had summoned the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever seen. He whispered to himself, "You asked for help. Now you will see what it means when humans answer." The fleet tore through the void, their guns armed, their soldiers ready. The cry for help had been heard, and the Deathworlders had answered. The galaxy would soon remember why the name of humanity was spoken in both hope and fear. And for the aliens waiting in the dark, salvation was coming. But salvation from humans was never gentle. It came with fire. It came with war. The alien colony was falling apart. Streets once filled with markets and children now lay silent, covered in smoke and ash. Buildings that had stood for generations were reduced to rubble. Fires burned without end, and the sky itself was choked with black clouds. The raiders showed no mercy. They swept through villages like a storm, taking what they wanted and destroying everything else. They laughed as they set homes ablaze, their ships circling above like predators watching helpless prey. The aliens could do nothing but hide. In the central shelter, hundreds of civilians huddled together. Mothers held their children close, whispering words of comfort they did not believe. Fathers and brothers stood near the doors with old rifles and broken tools, knowing they were useless against the raiders' weapons. Fear was everywhere. Even the strongest among them had lost hope. They had sent out their distress signal, but hours had passed, and the sky remained empty. For many, it felt like a cruel joke. Who would hear them? Who would risk their lives for a small, forgotten world? The young leader, the same woman who had pressed the beacon switch, walked among her people. Her name was Kira, and though she was tired and afraid, she did not let it show. She stopped by the children, smiling weakly as she told them to be brave. But when she turned away, her smile vanished. She climbed the steps to the old balcony of the council hall, the same spot where she had stood before. From there she could see the city, and her heart ached. The colony she had loved all her life was dying before her eyes. Behind her, the elder council argued in hushed voices. "We were fools to send that signal," one said bitterly. "If the raiders learn we called for help, they will punish us even more." Another shook his head. "No one will come. The galaxy does not care about us. We are too small, too weak. Our fate is sealed." Their words were heavy, and though they spoke quietly, the despair spread through the room like poison. Even those who wanted to believe began to doubt. Outside, the raiders marched closer to the shelter. Their voices carried through the smoke, cruel and mocking. "Come out, little ones," one shouted. "Your end is near." The civilians shivered at the sound. Some covered their ears, others wept quietly. They had no strength left to resist. Every moment felt like the last. Kira closed her eyes and prayed silently. She prayed not for victory but for mercy. She knew that if no one came, her people would not survive the night. She thought of the beacon again, wondering where the signal had gone. Was it lost in the void, drifting endlessly through stars that had no ears to hear? Or had it reached someone? And if it had, would they even care? Her heart sank. Perhaps the council was right. Perhaps no one in the galaxy cared about a dying world. The sound of explosions shook the ground. The raiders had begun blasting the outer walls of the city. Screams echoed through the streets as more families ran for cover. Panic spread through the shelter. People begged Kira to do something, but she had no answers. Her voice shook as she told them to stay calm, though she herself was breaking inside. She wanted to scream, to curse the galaxy for abandoning them. But she held back, because if she broke, the rest would break with her. Night came again, darker than ever. The stars were hidden behind the smoke, and only firelight lit the ruins. The aliens sat in silence, waiting for the sound of doors breaking and weapons firing. Every creak, every distant explosion made their hearts jump. They knew the raiders would come soon, and there was nothing left they could do. Hope was dying, replaced by the heavy weight of despair. In the corner of the shelter, a child whispered, "Will someone come for us?" No one answered. The silence was worse than any words. It was the silence of truth. No one believed anymore. But far away, across the stars, engines roared. A fleet was moving closer, faster with each passing hour. The Deathworlders had heard the signal. They were coming. The aliens did not know it yet, but their despair would soon meet something far greater than hope. For when humans came, they did not come quietly. They came with power, with fire, with the fury of survivors who had faced worse than anyone could imagine. For now, though, the colony only knew fear. They only knew despair. Their signal had gone into the void, and the void had not answered. Or so they thought. Tomorrow would change everything. The night was long and merciless. The colony lay in ruins, its streets nothing but ash and broken stone. The people inside the shelter waited in silence, knowing the raiders would soon break through their defenses. Every sound from outside made them flinch. Every explosion felt like the end. Some had given up, whispering prayers for a quick death. Others sat numb, too tired even to speak. In the council chamber above, Kira stood alone, staring at the sky through a broken window. Smoke and fire painted the heavens red, and she felt certain that no one would ever come. The beacon had been a last hope, and it had failed them. She closed her eyes, ready to accept the truth. Then it happened. A light appeared in the sky, faint at first, like a star that should not have been there. Kira opened her eyes and frowned. The light grew brighter, larger, until it split into many points of fire. She gasped. These were not falling stars. They were ships. Enormous ships. They cut through the smoke, their hulls black and scarred, their engines glowing with fierce blue light. The air itself seemed to tremble as they descended. The raiders noticed too. For the first time, their mocking laughter stopped. Their ships in orbit scrambled, moving to face the newcomers. Alarms rang out across their fleet. Kira ran to the balcony, shouting for her people to look. The shelter doors opened, and terrified faces turned upward. For a moment, silence fell over the colony. Even the crying children stopped, staring wide-eyed at the massive silhouettes now filling the heavens. They were not elegant, like the shining ships of some great empire. They were brutal, heavy, like weapons forged from iron. Every line of their design spoke of war and survival. No one could mistake them for anything but what they were: ships built to kill. The first roar of engines shook the ground as the Deathworlder fleet entered orbit. Their arrival was not graceful. It was thunderous, like the sound of storms breaking mountains. The raiders panicked. Some fired blindly into the sky, streams of energy flashing upward, but the human shields absorbed the blasts as if they were nothing. Others tried to flee, their ships turning away from the planet, but it was already too late. The Deathworlders had come, and there was no escape. From the flagship, Admiral Hale gave the order. Engage. The fleet responded instantly. Cannons fired with blinding force, beams of light cutting across the void. Raider ships exploded in flames, torn apart as if they were made of paper. Debris rained down through the clouds, shaking the earth as it fell. The colony watched in awe as their enemies, who had seemed unstoppable only hours before, were torn apart in seconds. The humans fought with terrifying precision, every strike designed to destroy. On the ground, raiders who had been marching toward the shelter now froze. They stared upward, fear replacing their arrogance. One shouted for retreat, another fired wildly into the sky, but soon they were running, scattering into the ruins. For the first time since the invasion began, the colonists saw their enemies flee. The sight brought tears to their eyes. Kira stood at the balcony, her voice trembling. "They came," she whispered. The signal was answered. She felt hope for the first time, but also fear. These newcomers were powerful, too powerful. She remembered the old warnings, the stories told by travelers in the Outer Rim. Humans. Deathworlders. Beings who had survived a world where death hunted every day. Beings the galaxy both feared and respected. She realized then that her people had not only called for help. They had called monsters made of flesh and steel. In the sky, the battle raged. Raider after raider was destroyed. Their fleet crumbled under the human assault. The speed, the power, the raw violence of the Deathworlders was unlike anything the aliens had seen. The colonists cheered, but their cheers were nervous, uncertain. These saviors looked as dangerous as the enemy they destroyed. As the last raider ship exploded in orbit, a silence fell. The smoke parted, and the Deathworlder fleet hung above the planet like dark gods watching from the sky. Slowly, one of the massive ships broke from formation, descending toward the surface. Its shadow stretched across the ruins, swallowing the city in darkness. The ground shook as it approached. Every alien in the colony felt their hearts race. Were these saviors? Or had they called something far worse? The ship landed outside the city walls, its engines shaking the earth. Dust and fire rolled outward, and the raiders who had not fled dropped their weapons in terror. The ramp opened with a hiss, and armored figures marched down, their steps heavy and steady. The first Deathworlders had arrived on the ground. Kira gripped the railing of the balcony, her breath caught in her throat. She had begged for help, and it had come. But as she looked at the towering figures in black armor, weapons gleaming in the firelight, she could not tell if this was salvation or the beginning of something even more dangerous. The aliens watched, silent and trembling. The Deathworlders had answered the call, and the galaxy would never be the same. The air was thick with smoke as the Deathworlder soldiers stepped onto the broken soil of the colony. Their boots struck the ground like thunder, metal and armor clashing with every move. They were taller than the aliens expected, wrapped in black suits that looked more like machines than flesh. Their helmets glowed with cold light, and the weapons in their hands hummed with deadly power. Even without firing a shot, they carried the weight of predators who had never lost a hunt. The colonists hiding in the ruins felt both hope and terror. They had prayed for saviors, but what had come felt more like gods of war. The raiders who had survived the fleet's destruction tried to rally. They shouted orders, forming lines in the ruined streets, their weapons raised toward the humans. Desperation burned in their eyes. They had crushed colonies before, stolen lives with ease, but they had never faced Deathworlders. Still, pride and fear drove them to fight. Blades clashed, rifles fired, and the first bolts of plasma streaked across the smoke. The humans did not flinch. They advanced with calm steps, weapons raised. Then, with a single command from their leader, the Deathworlders opened fire. The sound was deafening. Streams of light and thunder burst from their rifles, tearing through the raider lines like paper. Armor cracked, bodies fell, and screams filled the air. The aliens watching from the shelter had never seen such brutality. The humans did not waste a single shot. Every blast found its target, every movement was sharp and deadly. The raiders tried to hold their ground, but within seconds, their front line was broken. Kira stood on the balcony of the council hall, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She watched the humans march forward, leaving fire and ash in their wake. She wanted to cheer, to feel the relief of seeing her enemy destroyed, but something inside her hesitated. These were not gentle protectors. They fought with a savagery that made her heart race with fear. She whispered under her breath, "Are these our saviors, or something worse?" On the ground, the raiders panicked. Some dropped their weapons and fled into the ruins. Others charged wildly, screaming, their rage blinding them to the hopelessness of their fight. A Deathworlder met them head-on. The soldier raised a massive blade, cutting down 3 enemies in one strike. Another soldier fired a grenade into a cluster of raiders, and the explosion shook the earth, scattering bodies like leaves in a storm. The survivors screamed in terror. They were not facing soldiers. They were facing predators. The civilians inside the shelter clung to each other as the battle raged outside. Some wept with relief that their tormentors were being destroyed. Others wept with fear at the sight of the humans. A child asked his mother, "Will they protect us?" She could not answer. She had no words. The raiders' commander, a scarred brute with burning red eyes, roared from the battlefield. He ordered his troops to stand and fight, promising them riches and glory if they killed even one human. But his voice shook. He had seen his fleet destroyed in the sky. He knew what kind of force now stood against him. Still, pride drove him forward. He raised his weapon and fired at the leading Deathworlder. The bolt struck the human's armor, sparks flying, but the soldier did not fall. Slowly, the human turned, raising his rifle, and with a single shot, the commander was gone, his body thrown into the dirt like a broken doll. The raiders who saw it dropped their weapons in horror. Admiral Hale, watching from the command center of his ship, spoke calmly to his officers. "The enemy is broken. Secure the colony. Leave no threat standing." His voice carried no anger, No mercy, only the certainty of a man who knew victory was already his. Back on the ground, the last of the raiders were hunted through the streets. The humans moved like shadows, silent and unstoppable, flushing enemies out of hiding and cutting them down with cold precision. The colony shook with explosions, the ruins lit with fire, until nothing remained of the invaders. In less than an hour, the same raiders who had seemed invincible were reduced to corpses and ash. When the battle ended, silence fell across the colony. The Deathworlders stood tall among the ruins, their armor glowing faintly in the firelight. The colonists watched from hiding, hearts racing. They wanted to run to their saviors, to thank them, but fear held them still. These were not like any beings they had ever known. They did not celebrate victory. They did not cheer. They simply stood, scanning the ruins, making sure no threat remained. They looked less like heroes and more like executioners who had done their grim work. Kira stepped forward from the balcony, her voice barely above a whisper. "They saved us," she said. But in her heart, another thought followed. And now, we are in their hands. The battle was over. The raiders were gone. But the real question had just begun. What would the Deathworlders do next? The fires of battle still burned across the colony, but the fighting was over. The raiders were gone, their bodies scattered across the streets, their ships destroyed in the sky. The air was filled with the smell of smoke and scorched metal. The civilians slowly began to emerge from their hiding places, their eyes wide, their faces pale. They stepped cautiously onto the ruined streets, staring at the massive armored figures who stood silently among the wreckage. The Deathworlders did not speak, did not celebrate. They simply waited, their glowing visors scanning the ruins, their weapons still ready. To the colonists, they looked less like soldiers and more like towering statues of war. Kira led the first group out of the shelter. Her steps were slow, her heart pounding with both relief and fear. She had prayed for help, begged for anyone to hear their signal, and now the help had come. But as she looked at the humans, she could not tell if they were saviors or conquerors. The aliens behind her whispered nervously. Some called them angels, others called them monsters. All agreed on one thing: no one in the galaxy fought like this. No one in the galaxy could. One of the Deathworlder soldiers stepped forward, his armor blackened by smoke, his weapon hanging by his side. His voice came through a speaker, deep and metallic. "Your enemy is destroyed. You are safe now." The colonists flinched at the sound. His words were simple, but the tone carried no warmth. It was not comfort, only fact. Kira forced herself to speak. We thank you. Without you, we would all be dead." Her voice shook, but she stood tall. The soldier gave no reply. He only turned his head toward his commander. Moments later, the ground shook as a massive transport ship landed outside the city walls. Its ramp lowered, and more humans appeared. At the center walked Admiral Hale. Unlike his soldiers, he was not wrapped in heavy armor, though his uniform was dark and worn from years of war. His eyes were cold, sharp, and carried the weight of someone who had seen countless battles. He stopped at the edge of the ruins and looked upon the alien survivors. Silence followed, so heavy that even the children dared not cry. Then he spoke. "You called. We answered." The words echoed through the broken streets. They were not spoken with pride or kindness, but with a tone of finality, as if this was nothing more than duty. The aliens stared at him in awe. Some dropped to their knees in gratitude, while others stepped back in fear. To them, this man was more terrifying than the raiders had ever been, because the raiders were cruel for greed, but this human carried the cold certainty of power. Kira stepped forward, bowing her head slightly. "Admiral, we owe you our lives. Our world owes you everything. We will never forget this." She expected anger, or maybe compassion, but Hale only nodded. "Remember it well. The galaxy is not kind. You were lucky we heard you." His words cut deep. It was a reminder that their survival had not been earned, it had been given. Behind him, the soldiers began collecting weapons from the fallen raiders, moving with mechanical precision. They took nothing from the colony, no treasure, no reward. Still, the colonists watched nervously. The Deathworlders could have claimed the entire planet, and no one could have stopped them. Yet they did not. They fought, they won, and now they stood, waiting. Whispers spread among the survivors. Why did they help us? What do they want in return? Some feared a price would be demanded, something they could never pay. Others believed the humans had saved them out of honor, out of some strange code of their species. No one could agree, but all of them knew one truth: they would never forget what they had seen. Admiral Hale looked across the colony, at the burned homes and broken lives. He saw the fear in their eyes, and he understood it. He had seen it countless times before. Every species who looked upon humanity in war felt the same. Fear, respect, and something deeper, an understanding that Deathworlders were different, born from struggle no other world could imagine. He turned back to Kira. Rebuild your world. The raiders will not return. Not after this. His words were like stone, final and unquestionable. Kira nodded, though her heart raced. She knew he was right. The galaxy would hear of this. The story would spread. Raiders, pirates, even empires would remember what happened here. They would remember that when a small colony called for help, the humans came. And once they arrived, nothing could stand in their way. As the sun began to rise, its light cut through the smoke, revealing the ruins more clearly. The colonists gathered together, watching the human fleet still hanging in the sky like dark guardians. Children clung to their parents, asking if the humans would stay. The parents had no answers. Kira placed a hand on her chest, trying to steady her breath. They were alive, but survival had come at a cost. Now they lived with the memory of the Deathworlders' power, a memory that would never fade. The battle was over, but the shadows of the humans remained. They had brought both fear and respect. To the colonists, they were saviors. To the galaxy, they were a warning. The colony was quiet in the aftermath of battle. Smoke still rose from broken buildings, and the ground was littered with debris and ash. The people of the colony had begun to gather what little they could save. Families searched for survivors, children cried for those they had lost, and workers tried to clear the streets. Yet through all the ruin, their eyes always drifted to the humans who remained. The Deathworlder soldiers stood in silence like watchtowers, their weapons across their chests, their eyes hidden behind armored visors. They did not smile, did not speak, and did not show any emotion. It was as if war had carved the feelings out of them long ago. For the colonists, their presence was both comforting and terrifying. They had saved them, but their power was too great to fully trust. Admiral Hale walked among the ruins, his boots crunching over stone and shattered glass. He did not look down, he did not pause for the destruction. His eyes scanned the colony as if he had seen such ruin 100 times before, and perhaps he had. Kira followed carefully behind him, keeping a respectful distance. She felt the weight of his silence pressing on her, and she knew the others were just as uneasy. Finally, the admiral stopped at the center of the colony, where the signal tower still stood half-broken but standing. He looked at it for a long time, as though studying it. Then he turned, and his voice carried across the ruins. "You called for help. We came. But remember this. Humans do not come lightly. When we arrive, war follows." His words were sharp, like blades cutting through the smoke-filled air. The colonists froze, their whispers dying on their lips. Some trembled, others bowed their heads, but no one dared to interrupt. Hale's eyes swept across them all. "We do not answer every call. Many cry for help across the galaxy, and most are ignored. But when we decide to move, when the Deathworlder fleet rises, we do not stop until the enemy is broken. This is not mercy. This is not charity. This is war, and we fight it to the end." The crowd shifted nervously. Parents held their children close, elders bowed their heads. Some felt a spark of gratitude, others a chill of fear. Hale continued. "The raiders who came here thought you were weak. They thought you would be easy prey. They will never return. And those who hear what happened here will think twice before they strike again. But understand this, they will not fear you. They will fear us. And when they fear us, they will fear that you are under our shadow." His words rang like thunder, a promise and a curse at the same time. Kira finally found the courage to step forward. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to speak. "Admiral, we do not know how to thank you. Without you, we would have been destroyed. What do you ask of us in return?" The question hung in the air, heavy with dread. Every colonist leaned forward, waiting for the answer. Hale turned his gaze to her, and though his face was calm, his eyes carried the weight of storms. "Nothing," he said. "We did not come for tribute. We did not come for reward. But you will remember this. Tell your children. Tell your people. When humanity answers a call, the war is never small. If you call us again, know that the enemy will not be the only ones who fear us." The words settled into their hearts like iron. Relief washed over some. The humans wanted no payment. But fear tightened in others. What did it mean to live with such allies, such protectors? They realized that to call the Deathworlders again might save them, but it might also bring destruction so great that even salvation would burn. Admiral Hale turned toward his fleet, raising his hand in a silent signal. The soldiers began to march back to their transports, their movements perfectly in sync, like one mind shared by many bodies. Engines roared to life as massive warships prepared to depart the planet's skies. The colonists watched with wide eyes, hardly breathing as the ships lifted into the heavens, their shadows passing across the colony one last time. Before stepping onto his own ship, Hale gave one last look at the survivors. His voice cut through the air, steady and unshaken. "Survive. Rebuild. And do not forget what you saw today. The galaxy is cruel, but cruelty bows to strength. When you call humanity, strength answers." With that, he turned and disappeared into the transport. The ships rose, breaking through the sky with fire and thunder. The ground shook as their engines carried them into orbit, and soon they were gone, leaving only silence behind. The colonists stood together, their hearts racing, their minds filled with fear, respect, and questions. Some whispered prayers of thanks, others whispered warnings to each other. Kira stood still, staring at the sky where the humans had vanished. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone. She understood now, the Deathworlders were both saviors and executioners. They did not come for kindness. They came for war. As the last echoes of the fleet faded into the distance, Kira whispered softly to herself, "We are alive. But the galaxy will never be the same." And she knew she was right. The story of the warning would spread, carried across systems, whispered in every shadow. The Deathworlders had answered the call, and with them had come a reminder that shook the stars themselves. The humans were gone, but their shadow remained. The colony stood in silence for many hours after the last ship left orbit, as though the people were afraid to speak too loudly and disturb the memory of what had just happened. The ruins of their homes and streets reminded them of the price of survival, but the image burned into their minds was not the fire, not the destruction, not even the raiders. It was the sight of the Deathworlder fleet hanging above them, like a wall of iron across the stars. For the colonists, this was no longer just a story of survival. This was the beginning of something larger, something that would spread beyond their world. And indeed, it did. When the first traders arrived weeks later, they listened in silence as the survivors told the tale. The words carried weight, and every detail was told again and again. The distress signal, the hopeless waiting, the sudden arrival of humans, the brutal battle that ended in a single night, and finally the warning from Admiral Hale. The traders carried this story to the next station, and from there to another, until it spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Soon, in spaceports and taverns, on freighters and military outposts, whispers began to rise. "Did you hear what happened on the colony?" The Deathworlders answered a call. Some laughed nervously, some scoffed, but all of them listened. The raider clans were the first to feel the fear. Those who had survived the battle, scattered and broken, told their own side of the story. They spoke of weapons that tore through ships in seconds, of soldiers who fought like machines, of humans who did not stop until every enemy was crushed. Their warnings carried no lies, only raw terror. Across the lawless regions of space, raider leaders began to whisper new orders: avoid colonies that may have ties to humans. Do not risk another war with Deathworlders. Fear began to spread like an infection, and for the first time in years, small colonies and trade outposts saw a little peace, not because they were strong, but because the raiders were afraid of who might answer their cries. Meanwhile, other civilizations listened with unease. In the councils of great empires, politicians and generals debated what the story meant. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, but others shook their heads. They had seen humans fight before. They knew the stories were not lies. The Deathworlders answered once, they said, and they may answer again. Some saw this as a threat. Others saw it as a chance. Small nations, weak and often preyed upon, began to wonder if they too could call upon humanity if danger came. But they also remembered the warning: the war would not be small, and the cost would be high. Back on the colony, life slowly returned, though it was forever changed. The people rebuilt their homes with shaky hands, always looking at the sky as though expecting another fleet to arrive. Children played in the streets again, but they did so while pretending to be humans, their wooden toys shaped like massive ships and armored warriors. To them, the Deathworlders were not monsters but heroes, larger than life, the saviors who had come when no one else would. Parents did not correct them, though in their own hearts, the adults remembered the cold words of Admiral Hale. They knew better. The humans had saved them, yes, but they were not heroes. They were something far more dangerous. Kira became the voice of the colony. Again and again, she was asked to repeat her story, to describe every word, every action, every look in the eyes of the humans. She spoke carefully, never leaving out the warning. They told us to rebuild. They told us to survive. But they also told us this: when humans come, the war is never small. Her words carried into recordings, messages, and reports that traveled far from their world. She did not want to make them into gods, nor into demons. She only wanted the truth to be remembered. And it was remembered. Across the galaxy, the phrase became legend. Distressed aliens called for help, and the Deathworlders came. To some, the words meant hope. To others, they meant fear. For those in power, they were a warning never to underestimate humanity. For those without power, they were a sign that even the weakest might one day call upon the strongest to survive. But everyone who heard the story understood one truth: the galaxy had changed. A signal had been sent, and humanity had answered. Nothing would be the same again. On distant worlds, children whispered the tale before bed, their eyes wide with wonder. On warships, hardened commanders spoke of it in grim voices, knowing that if humanity could bring such fear to raiders, then perhaps even empires should tread carefully. And in the dark corners of space, where pirates planned their next raids, the name of Deathworlders was spoken only in hushed tones, like a curse or a prayer. Kira stood one evening on the rebuilt signal tower, looking at the stars. She thought of Admiral Hale's eyes, cold and unshaken, and she remembered his words. She knew that one day, somewhere in the galaxy, another colony would send a signal. Someone else would be desperate, someone else would be hunted. And when that call went out, she wondered what the humans would do. Would they answer again? And if they did, would the galaxy cheer, or tremble? As the stars shone above her, Kira whispered into the night. We called. They came. And the galaxy will never forget.